Hey students, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 3 in U.S. History. In Chapter 3 we learned about the three distinct areas of the 13 colonies. These are the 13 colonies right here. Stops at Georgia. Florida was not part of the 13 colonies at this time. And it stopped at the Appalachian Mountains. Everything west of the Appalachian Mountains was claimed by France. But later, it's going to be given to Great Britain as a result of the French and Indian War, which we'll discuss in more detail later on. The 13 colonies had three distinct areas. We have the New England colonies right here, the middle colonies right here, and the southern colonies right here. The New England colonies were very industrious. Shipbuilding, trading in furs, lumber. Not much farming because the soil was much more rocky and the growing season was much more shorter in the higher latitudes. And then the middle colonies, right here, this was called the breadbasket colonies because they produced lots of grain, wheat, corn, and they made enough to export to England quite a bit. They had a very mixed economy. They had a lot of manufacturing, a lot of trade, and farming. Then the southern colonies, the Carolinas, Georgia, Maryland. These colonies were more agriculturally based. They grew rice, tobacco, indigo, which were very labor intense. As a result, they imported a lot of slaves. In the southern colonies, there were, in some places, slaves outnumbered the European Americans. This week, we're going to begin on life in the colonies. On Monday and Tuesday, we'll do the first half of Section 1, Wednesday and Thursday, the second half of Section 1. The title was Colonial Life. It talks about the distinct areas of the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. Then, in the second half of that section, are the southern colonies and the growth of slavery. Because of the labor-intense markets in the South, the rapid rise in the slave population, and the exploitation of slave labor. Now, slavery has been practiced all over the world during all times, and only in the last 200-300 years has the moral issue of slavery been carefully examined and repudiated. In other words, shown to be immoral throughout the world. And eventually, no place does slavery exist legally in the world today. Not much is written about slave life from an enslaved person's perspective, but there are a few documents that illustrate the injustice of slavery. One such document is the memoirs of the life of Olaudah Equiano, born 1745, died 1797. And he was a slave who made his living as a slave on a slave ship. He was able to work long enough to buy his freedom. And even after he got his freedom, he worked on that slave ship until he actually saw one of his friends from Africa tortured to death on the deck of a slave ship. It almost led to a nervous breakdown for him. He had a religious revelation and he moved to England, and that's where he spent the rest of his life. Also, that's where he wrote his memoirs, or his life story about being captured and sold into slavery. I'll read a little bit of it today. Maybe I'll read a little bit more of it later on in the week. So this is what he wrote. My father, besides many slaves, had numerous family members, of which 7 lived to grow up, including myself and my sister, who was the only daughter. As I was the youngest of the sons, I became, of course, the greatest favorite of my mother, and was always with her, and she used to take particular pains to form my mind. I was trained up from my earliest years in the arts of agriculture and war, and my mother adorned me with emblems after the manner of our greatest warriors. In this way I grew up until I turned the age of 11, when an end was put to my happiness in the following manner. One day, when all our people were gone out to the fields to work, as usual, and I only had my dear sister left with me to mind the house, 2 men and a woman got over the walls and in a moment seized us both, and without giving us time to cry out or make resistance, they stopped our mouths and ran off with us into the nearest wood. He continues writing, I now saw myself deprived of all chance of returning to my native country, or even the least glimpse of hope of gaining the shore, which I now considered as friendly. I even wished for my former slavery in preference to my present situation, which has filled me with horrors of every kind. There I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life. With the loathsomeness of this and the stench and the crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. I now wished for that last friend, death, to relieve me. So now he's on board the ship, and they're getting ready to disembark to start for America. And this is how he describes it. The stench of the hold while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time. Some of us had been permitted to stay on deck for fresh air, but now that the whole ship's cargo was confined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number of the ship, which was so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspiration, so that the air became unfit for respiration from a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victims of the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of the purchasers. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, and now became unsupportable in the filth of the necessary tubs, which were the toilets, into which the children often fell and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole a scene of horror almost inconceivable. I hope I did somewhat justice to this article. You can research it too. It's mentioned in your workbook and it's mentioned in your textbook. And you can go online. There's volumes written about this man and his trials and tribulations. On Friday of this week, there's a short video and worksheet. Usually students do quite well on these video worksheets and it brings the grades up. And these grades that we'll be doing this week, we're going to go on quarter two's grades. Everything we've done up until this week is going on quarter one grade. So make sure you get all those old assignments turned in as quickly as possible so that your grade can be as good as it can. Keep messaging me if you have any questions. Remember, use your workbook, read the workbook, and complete the worksheet on a separate sheet of paper. Then go into the assessment and complete that using your worksheet. It makes it a lot easier, and the grades usually are a lot better if you do that. Follow those simple words of advice. You guys have a great week. Thank you.